Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Coldar here. Today we are looking at a guide for Horridon normal difficulty in Throne of Thunder. So this guy is a cool little dinosaur and is quite a long fight. A fair jump in difficulty over the first encounter in the zone, Jinrock. But the basic premise here is that throughout the fight you have your tanks controlling Horridon, while most of your raid is dealing with the adds that will spawn from the 4 gates around the room. So this kind of splits the fight up into 5 basic phases for the most part. So we'll just kind of go through each set of adds and therefore each phase until all the adds are dead, and then the final phase as well. So let's get started. Now first, before we get into the adds, we'll talk a little bit about Horridon himself. He's pretty simple, which is good. So when you pull him, he will start using his 2 main abilities fairly frequently. His primary ability is on tanks, called Triple Puncture, and this is basically the mechanic that forces you to use 2 tanks in this fight. So Triple Puncture does heavy physical damage to the target, but also applies a 60-second debuff that increases Triple Puncture damage by 10% per stack, and this can stack up very high. So, at some point, you will have to force a tank swap on Horridon, just so that the Triple Puncture spike damage does not get too excessive. So obviously, once one tank's Triple Puncture stack is wearing out, then the next tank can grab him and just keep going back and forth. Now, the method that we found to work out, depends on your DPS a bit, is just to swap for every set of adds. So the current tank on the boss, when a new set of adds would spawn, they would switch to the adds while the previous tank would grab Horridon. And by the time the next set of adds were active, a swap could happen again and just go back and forth. But either way, just swap when Triple Puncture is about to run out on the previous tank, and you should be fine. The other main ability is Double Swipe, which you can see is being cast right there. And after a couple seconds of this cast, he will swipe with both his head and his tail in 2 hits in a cone in front and behind him. So the best way to manage this is to position Horridon, as you can see here, so that his side is toward the gate that the raid is positioned at. So most of the time when he double swipes, he will only do so toward the tank and then, behind him, like he's doing there. So the only person that has to move is the current Horridon tank. Everyone else is safely on his side. The final ability he'll use throughout the fight is Charge. And this is not very frequent, but he will charge toward a random raid member. And shortly after the charge, he will use Double Swipe again. So this will cause him to swipe toward the raid, wherever it is he charged. In this case, most of your raid members will probably need to sidestep to avoid the swipe, but you have plenty of time to do so. So you can sidestep it or just max range it by getting out of the way. And that's pretty much it. So Horridon will use all that stuff throughout the fight, and you just have to be aware of when he can do stuff like charge, and your tanks need to dodge, and it's pretty simple. So before we get into the specific mechanics of individual add types, so the sets of adds that you'll get from each door, let's talk a little bit about the overall mechanics that are true for all the add sets, regardless of the one you're on specifically. So the first thing to keep in mind is that each set of adds has 1, 2, or 3 sort of constantly spawning adds. These are add types that will just continuously appear throughout the add phase, and you must deal with however many you allow to spawn before you transition the phase. So in this case, you can see there those 2 types of adds, the Stone Gazers and the Skirmishers. Those are the common ones for this add type. So they will just keep spawning from that door throughout the phase until we smash the door. Usually these common adds are stunnable in some way. You can root them, CC them, knock them back, all that stuff. So you should do so. The other rule is that each doorway will spawn a set of 3 more powerful adds, or a trio. So in this case, the first doorway, the trio, is the Waste Walkers. These are generally larger mobs and by far the most dangerous of the particular set. So when the trio mobs spawn, you want to immediately start DPSing those down and managing their abilities. Usually this is in the form of interrupts. So try to assign interrupts on the trio mobs. If you can have people quickly mark them with a raid marker and then have one interrupt assigned to each raid marked mob, that's going to be the most efficient way to do it by far. We don't quite do that, and it's probably a mistake not to do so, but that's generally a good idea. So the next main rule is that the final rule for all the ad types is that after a minute of fighting the ads, a minute after the door opens, a Dinomancer will spawn. You can see one in the top right there. These are single mobs, very large, and these should be the top priority for all your DPS when they appear. These are the key to ending the ad phase that you're on. So when a Dinomancer spawns in caster form, it will shortly after start channeling a heal on Horridon. And while this heal is allowed to channel, it will heal him for 4 million per second. So you want to interrupt that immediately. Otherwise, you're DPSing the Dinomancer immediately so that you can get it below 50% health. Once the Dinomancer reaches 50% health, it will turn into a dinosaur form, no longer heal, and more importantly, it will drop an orb of control on the ground where it was standing. This orb should immediately be right-clicked by any random raid member, doesn't matter who, and this will cause the sort of control over Horridon to be taken, forcing him to smash the gate that the ads were spawning from, and it will end the phase. So you can see him smashing the gate here. Now, mobs will stop spawning from that gate, and then you can move on to the next gate, prepare for the next set of ads. All right, with the general ad mechanics out of the way, let's talk about the specific ads that you'll face. So the first door is to the northwest. This is the Farraki door. So you want to bring the boss over to this door when the fight starts. Now, as soon as the ads start to be spawn, you'll get these two minor mobs, the skirmishers and the stone gazers, and they will spawn throughout. And then you'll start getting the trio mobs. In this case, it's the Waste Walkers. So you want to focus on the Waste Walkers primarily. They're the most dangerous. Now, in their case, they will cast a Blazing Sunlight ability on random raid members. And this can be interrupted, and you should do so as much as possible. If this goes off, it will hit the targeted player for 80,000 damage initially, and then applies a dot of 20,000 damage every 1 second for 30 seconds. And this is a magic debuff, so it can be dispelled. However, this ability also stacks, so if you don't interrupt very many of these, or you allow a lot of casts to go off without dispelling, most of your raids going to start having dots on them, and this is a lot of damage to manage. So dispel early and often. You can utilize, healer dispels primarily, or mass dispel from a priest, whatever it is that you have. But the key here is to interrupt them so they don't cast at all. But if they do get it off, dispel people quickly. Obviously, prefer people with more than one stack over single stack players. Other than that, the Waste Walkers will also use Sand Trap. And this is just a trap that's cast under a random raid member. And if a player stands in it, it deals about 100,000 nature damage per second and will grow in size over time. So obviously keep your raids spread out somewhat. And if you get a trap near you or under you, move immediately. Pretty basic. Be careful about ground effects. It can be difficult to see things like the sand trap with the, snare trap down from a hunter or things like that. So just be aware that if you're taking damage, you're probably standing in something you should move. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. So again, focus on Waste Walkers primarily once they start spawning. You can AE damage on the weaker Stone Gazers and Skirmishers. And of course, when the Dinomancer spawns, focus on him immediately. Make sure you interrupt his heal. if you can, and then click the orb as soon as he gets below 50%. Once the gate is smashed, you can clean up the rest of the mobs that are remaining and then make your way clockwise to the next location. So once you're done with the first ad set, close the door, move clockwise to the second gateway, and this is where you'll get the Gurubashi ads. So these are pretty dangerous, more so than the first set, but there are only two types of ads here. So the common type is the Gurubashi Bloodlords. These are basic melee mobs that will use Rending Charge fairly frequently on a random raid member. So basically, if they charge you, you'll bleed for about 60,000 physical damage a second for 15 seconds. You can't really get rid of it other than, something like Hand of Protection. So you just have to heal through that damage. So focus the Bloodlords down if they're active, but more importantly is the Venom Priests. Venom Priests are the trio mobs for this gate. So their main ability, which you should interrupt as much as possible, is Venom Bolt Volley. So this hits everyone in the raid, which is why it's exceptionally dangerous, causing a dot on that player. So it does about 10,000 damage initially, but more importantly, it does a dot for 10,000 damage every 3 seconds for a minute, and this stacks up. So this can be dispelled with Poison Dispels. So again, just like the first set, you really have to focus on dispelling if you're not able to get rid of these. The other ability that Venom Priests use is called Venomous Fusion. And these are these pools that you see around the ground. These are very deadly. Basically, they move around slowly and just kind of shuffle around on their own. But if you stand in one, you're going to take 200,000 damage a second. So don't do that. So the key here, interrupt volleys as much as you can. But if you can't interrupt them all at all the time, then again, dispel poisons rapidly. Once you focus those down and you get the Dinomancer, then you'll of course transition to the next set of ads. So door number 3 is the Drakkari. And these are probably the least controllable of the ads. The two types of ads that will spawn on their own are the Drakkari Warriors and the Drakkari Champions. And neither of these are controllable by a tank. They will target random raid members. When they attack a target, they will apply the Deadly Plague debuff, which is a dot that stacks up, lasts 5 minutes, and deals 20,000 damage every 3 seconds per stack. It's a disease effect. So again, you can notice the theme. First, you have to dispel magic on door 1. Then you dispel poison, door 2. Door 3, you dispel disease. And the final door will be curse. So these champions and warlords, or warriors, will just randomly run around the raid and applying these disease stacks. So try your best to dispel them quickly and stun, control, and burn down these ads so that the damage is not very high. You're really just trying to control everything until the Dinomancer spawns. You can end the phase. Now, the trio mobs for this doorway are Frozen Warlords. These can and should be tanked by your non-Horridon tank. And these do a lot of damage on that tank player. Basically, they use Mortal Strike, which is a huge hit, and of course reduces the healing on the player by 50% for 8 seconds. So our Paladin tank was tanking those, and you really want to use tank cooldowns while you're tanking 2 or 3 Warlords. They will destroy you if you're not careful. The other thing they do is an ability called Frozen Orb. And this basically just summons a Frozen Orb. And it will slowly float around and kind of shoot at random players that are nearby every 1 second. So there's not much you can do about it other than just staying away from them as best you can. But they do about 50,000 damage when they shoot you, and they'll slow your movement speed a little bit. So just stay away from the orbs as much as possible, and focus your DPS to end the phase sooner rather than later. That's pretty much it. So let's move on to the final door. Now, door number 4 spawns the Amani, and this is appropriately probably the most difficult doorway or set of ads. Just there are a ton of different ads, and there are a lot of abilities to watch for. So the common ads are the Protectors, Flamecasters, and Warbearers. And Protectors are basically just melee mobs, not much to do here. The Flamecasters will cast Fireball on random raid members pretty frequently. So try to interrupt that if you can do so. But it should not be your primary interrupt target. You know, if you have to choose between interrupting Flamecasters and the trio mobs, the Beast Shaman, go for the Beast Shaman. Anyway, and then Warbearers, they will use a cone attack called Swipe, which does about 100,000 physical damage in a 5-yard cone in front of them. So if you see a Warbearer on you or targeting you, try to make sure you're not near any other players so that no one else gets hit. They can and should be tanked, however, by your ad tank at the time. And then finally, the trio mobs in this set are the Beast Shaman. So once again, you want to focus your DPS on those trio mobs to get them down quickly once they start appearing. So these will cast Chain Lightning on random raid members, and this does about 80,000 damage, and then will jump to 3 players in total. So the damage, just like normal Chain Lightning, will go down as the jumps occur. But it still should be interrupted if you can do so. The main ability that you need to watch for is Hex of Confusion. And so this is a curse cast on random raid member. It lasts 30 seconds, and while it's applied to them, it causes them to have 50% chance when using any ability to deal 50,000 damage to themselves. So obviously if you have, 1 second global, or 1.5 second even, every other cast, so every 2 or 3 seconds, you're going to do 50,000 damage to yourself on average. That adds up quickly. So any players that you have that are capable of dispelling curses should focus primarily on getting rid of that debuff on raid members. If you keep the curse down, then the rest of the damage is pretty healable and pretty manageable. But that curse can add up quickly. So again, dispels of some form are going to be needed and very highly prioritized. The last ability for the Beast Shaman is Lightning Nova Totem. And this is dropped underneath them at random times. And after a few seconds, it will activate. And it will pulse AE damage in about 8-yard radius of about 400,000. So it's very deadly if you stand in that. So if you see a totem drop near you, just assume it's a bad one and move away from it. This is not so dangerous for ranged casters, healers, but melee especially need to watch for that since a lot of stuff is going on and will be all over the ground. And otherwise, once the Dynamancer spawns, again, just burn him down, use the orb, and stop the ads from spawning, and then clean everything up, and you'll be transitioning into the final phase. So, as you clean up the 4th set of ads and the final door is shattered, you want to move Horridon a little bit closer to the center of the room, just to give your raid some space to move around safely. But the basic mechanic here is that every time you would cause Horridon to smash a gate and stop the ads from spawning, he's gaining a stacking debuff called Cracked Shell. And this increases the damage that he takes by 50% per stack. So after the 4th gate, obviously, he's taking 200% extra damage. So this is really the key to beating the sort of soft enrage or even hard enrage, the Berserk timer as well. So throughout the fight, while you're killing ads, you can do damage to Horridon, and he'll take more and more as he gets more stacks. But generally speaking, most of your DPS and attention will be on killing the ads until the end, and then you can focus everything on Horridon. Now, about a minute after you close the 4th gate, the War God Jalak will jump down in the arena and engage the raid as well. So you have about a minute after the ads are dealt with to DPS Horridon by himself. This is a good time to use your Bloodlust and whatnot. And try to position him a little bit in the center for the War God's position as well. Now, when War God Jalak spawns, he should be picked up by your non-Horridon tank immediately. And he has very low health, a little under 20 million. But he also acts as sort of a soft enrage mechanic. So about every 15 seconds, he will use his AE shout ability called Bestial Cry. This does 100,000 physical damage to the entire raid, and also causes a buff on Jalak, which increases his damage dealt by 50% per stack, and this just keeps stacking up. So this is the soft enrage sort of. In addition to doing 50% more damage to the tank that he's targeting, he will also do 50% more damage from his cry attack. And this can be a pretty damaging thing after a while. On the other hand, if you choose to kill War God Jalak, he will cause Horridon to rampage, increases Horridon's damage by 100% and his attack speed by 50%. So I would guess what we determined is that mechanically you are not meant to kill the War God, because the damage increase on Horridon, 100% plus the attack speed, is very high. Now, on normal, you can survive it with cooldowns, but keep in mind things like the triple puncture on the tanks are going to do a lot of damage with a 100% bonus on it. So it just depends a little bit on your raid's DPS whether you can afford to kill War God or not. In our case, we decided not to kill him and just deal with the increasing shout damage because we knew that we could keep the tank alive on Horridon and heal the raid damage before things got out of control. But if you can't quite deal with the shout damage, it stacks up too quickly, but you think you can use enough cooldowns in your tanks, then you should kill the War God, and after he's dead, then finish Horridon off. Anyway, that is normal difficulty Horridon. So, good luck, and thanks for watching.